Hello listeners, welcome back to Luke's English podcast. I hope you're doing fine out there in Lapland. Here's my introduction to part 2 of this double episode. Now I could have made this introduction much shorter. I wrote this morning and I could have made this a lot shorter probably, but I haven't. And that's for 2 reasons. The first reason is because context is really important and it can help you understand what you're going to hear. And obviously this is a show for learners of English. And I like to present sort of natural conversations. Sometimes they can be difficult to follow if English isn't your first language. So I provide a bit of context at the start to help you. So that's the first reason this introduction is quite long. And the second reason I chose to keep this long is because I just want to prove that I didn't use ChatGPT to write this, okay? This was written by me, a human being, as far as I know. So let's go. So this is the second part of a double episode. You should probably listen to part 1 of this first. That should be the episode I published directly before this one. And you'll find a link to it in the description. Okay. So just a reminder of the concept for this double episode. My guest is Antony Rotunno, who's an English teacher, life coach, and podcaster. One of Antony's podcasts is called Life and Life Only. And in his episodes, he talks about a wide variety of interesting topics. It's a mix of personal development, social commentary, philosophy, psychology, and more. The topics Antony covers are quite diverse, but the overall theme, as I understand it, is about finding truth and meaning in our lives. That's inner truth, sort of understanding yourself, and outer truth, understanding the world around you. That's how I understand it. And I was listening to episode 37 the other day and I thought to myself, this is good. This is good stuff. I should invite Antony onto my podcast to talk about some of these things. I find it all very interesting. Maybe my audience will find it interesting too. And maybe I can spread the word about Antony's podcast a bit as well. So that's what's happening here. So this is what I hope will be interesting content to help you get more English listening practice into your everyday life. In the first part, we talked about cats, the Titanic, traveling, teaching English, and life coaching. And in this part, the plan is to talk about some other things that Antony has covered in episodes of his podcast, namely David Blaine, the illusionist and endurance artist, and some of the incredible stunts and endurance feats he's done over the years. Food and our relationships to eating and dieting, favourite films, including the mysterious and fascinating work of Stanley Kubrik, and conspiracy theories, especially what that term really means, comedy and how it can reveal quite profound truths about things, and happiness. What is it? Where is it? How can we find it? What does it look like? What does it smell like? Maybe not what does it smell like, but anyway, happiness. So that's quite a heavy and diverse selection of topics to deal with. Hopefully we'll be able to do more than just skim the surface of each one. Each topic does deserve a whole episode of its own. And of course, that's what Antony has already done. There are episodes all about all of those things in Life and Life Only. So if you want a more thorough discussion of each topic, listen to the Life and Life Only podcast. Links are in the description or on the page for this episode on my website. Okay, so that's it. The introduction is finished. We made it. Let's say hello to Antony. Hello, Antony.
Hi. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, you still awake after that?
Yeah. I'm currently, in case your listeners are wondering why I've lost so much weight since part 1. And got that slightly post-illness, starry-eyed look. Yeah, I have just been ill, so I have been on some health farm since part 1 already.
Yeah, it's been like 2 weeks, I think, since we recorded part 1. Okay, so it's like, I think for the listeners, it's going to be 1 week between part 1 being published and part 2 being published. But there's in our world, it's been about 2 weeks, and I look healthier than I did 2 weeks ago, and you look slightly less healthy, or you're certainly thinner. Yeah. So for me, I just had a week of holiday at the seaside, which was lovely. But what about you? What has happened to you over the last 2 weeks?
I've just had my first COVID holiday, you might call it. Um, yeah, the only member of my family who hadn't had COVID. And then I was about a couple of weeks ago, 10 days ago, I was going through one of those periods where I wasn't having any rest at all, and I kind of knew something was brewing, and I just woke up feeling like death warmed up, as we might say in England. And after I thought I had tonsillitis because I used to get that quite a lot when I was a smoker, but I'm not a smoker now. But thought I had that, and then I did a test and found I had COVID, and yeah, it was about 5 pretty hideous days, but pretty surreal as well. But I always try and look forward a bit or think in a forward way, and I always think that the times when I'm ill is the only time when I ever actually properly rest, in fact, and do nothing, which for me generally means, I don't know, reading a book or something. That's my doing nothing. But then you do feel a little bit cleansed because I didn't eat for a week. I didn't eat anything other than yogurt and fruit. And like I said, I did lose a bit of weight. Suddenly all my clothes fit, which is a nice bonus. But yeah, it's not the best way to achieve that. But I do come out of it feeling quite calm because I have actually slowed down and properly relaxed. So now I'm feeling all right. Got a bit of a cold, but yeah, doing all right.
It's really nice when you come out of an illness like that. Obviously, going through it's horrible. I mean, I had flu. I had flu in December, and that was just awful. Like a proper case of real flu, not just the sort of I had a bit of flu. Like it was the genuine article, and that was just absolutely horrible. But yeah, it's a hideous experience. You go through hell, and then when you start to feel better, that's nice. When you sort of like start, you kind of rub your eyes and emerge, blinking into the light. You start to feel human again, and so you have lost a bit of weight between part 1 and part 2 of this. Catching COVID in 2023. I mean, that's
bit late.
I don't know. It's a bit late, isn't it? Yeah, a bit late to the game on that one.
I don't know. That tends to happen with me. I don't know. I tend to be a bit slow in that regard. Like I suddenly catch up with trends that were going about 3 years ago. But I really did get, I think it's a wake-up call as well, because I was really hammering it with a new job and all the teaching and the podcasting and everything, and it was just, wasn't having any rest at all. I mean, a little bit, but it was a good wake-up call, I think. Got to listen to your body.
Burning the candle at both ends. Yeah, listen to your body, right. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Right, so are you ready to get stuck into some topics?
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, so the first item on my list this time is David Blaine. Right? So probably what we should do first is make sure everyone knows who David Blaine is. Who is he? Could you describe who he is with the sort of international audience in mind? I wonder if everyone out there in the world is familiar with David Blaine. I think he's probably internationally famous.
I feel like he would be, yeah. I mean, his job title would traditionally have been magician, although people tend to call him an illusionist, which is obviously along the same lines. It's funny that a lot of the time in America and Britain, you'll have these more or less equivalents. And in England, of course, we have Derren Brown, who's obviously still around. The difference is Derren Brown seems much more of an introvert. And well, actually, maybe Blaine seemed an introvert as well. He sort of had a kind of brooding intensity about him. But he became famous in the late 90s for street magic. And the idea was that instead of being, in a studio and you get someone to sit down and do a card trick, he'd go out in the street. And the thing that he tapped into, I think, was that it doesn't matter if you're black, white, whatever race you are, young or old, rich or poor, you more or less have the same reaction when someone does some magic, which is actually that you start laughing. I don't know if you found that. You laugh just because it's kind of nice, seeing someone do something. You go, oh, blimey, how did he do that? So he does. He used to do card tricks and things like that, but then he branched out and he'd make things disappear. And obviously, you can be a bit skeptical about all that. I don't think him or Darren Brower is ever claiming that they're actually tapped into magic from some other place. They're just very, very skillful. But the interesting thing about David Blaine is that at some point, I think also in the late 90s, he decided that he wanted to test himself and do endurance stunts. Now, of course, the problem is that as soon as you start doing them, everyone's going to go, oh, right, that's a magic trick. You know, you didn't really bury yourself alive. The first one he did, he buried himself alive in a coffin, and they actually had he was actually visible as well. They had some water between the coffin and what people could see, so people could actually view it. And I think it was genuine. I think he was testing the limits, because he was one of those people as well. He said from a young age, he was a very strange kid. He'd do things like, you know, shut himself in a closet or whatever, just to test himself, just to see how long he could stand it. And he would not eat and things like that. And so then he started this parallel career, I suppose, of what he would call performance art. The general idea being performance art is that the performer doesn't necessarily do a lot. They're just in a place, and the art comes from the way that people react to what they do. So, yes, you sort of had Darren and David around the same time on different sides of the Atlantic, doing this thing. Yeah, so it's sort of magic, modern magic, I suppose. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. So, shall we talk about? I mean, okay, just I guess David Blaine's first became famous, doing magic in the street, basically. And he would, this mysterious aura. He'd be like, "Look at this. Let me show you something. Let me just try something. Look." And he'd be doing these wild, amazing feats of illusion, and then people kind of like, losing their mind in the street and stuff. Fantastic. Yeah, and then he started doing these endurance feats. So when we say endurance, we're talking about sort of being able to kind of do something really difficult for a very long time. Yeah. So that includes being shut in one small space for a long time, or holding your breath, like holding your breath underwater for a very long time, standing on the top of a very tall pillar for a very, very long time. Tell us about some of the things that he did then, and what do you think of them?
Okay, well, in order. So he did buried himself alive for 7 days. Then there was ice. He was encased in ice, very, very close to the ice, for about 3 days. And bear in mind, let's just say these were genuine, all right?
Yeah.
In all these cases, he would not be sleeping or eating either, which is probably difficult enough. Just that alone is difficult enough. But there's some good clips. He was on Joe Rogan a couple of years ago, talking about the ice thing. I mean, he properly freaked out, started hallucinating. I mean, that was a pretty bad thing. And he said, I'd never in a million years do that again. Then he did another one. Yeah, he was on a pillar for a day and a half. But this one was quite good because it actually had an ending. And what they did was they constructed cardboard boxes in the last few hours. And then at the very end, they did a countdown, 10, 9, 8, and he jumped into the boxes to finish it. So people like that because there was some sort of ending rather than him just hanging around doing something. And then there was the one that's probably the one I was always most interested in, was the one called Above the Below. So what I did the podcast about, where he was in a box suspended from a crane by Tower Bridge, 2003.
In London.
Yeah, and didn't eat for 44 days. And again, people have argued about, did he have pure water or did it have electrolytes in it? But he actually came up with an explanation where electrolytes wouldn't have helped him. That was on. I was only there for the beginning. I think I went to Thailand to work, and Channel 4 actually had a live webcam. And of course, to some people, it just sounds the most ridiculous. Why would you bother just watching a guy doing nothing? But again, the performance art came from the reaction of the general public in England, which is really, really interesting. Basically, quite a lot of hate at the beginning. People going, "Oh, what are you doing? Bloody American coming over here, with all your lofty ideas." And then as he got weaker and weaker, the British sympathy for the underdog came out. And then by the end, on the actual last day, which was a Sunday night, I remember, I mean, there were thousands of people there. It was very strange the way it turned into a massive party. And, there were young girls. One young girl, David had thrown down his blanket. You can imagine how bad that would have smelled and everything. And she was clutching it. And there were people having fancy relationships with him because the other thing about him, he was a very, very good looking fella. You have to say that. He had that mysterious way about him. And, I used to call it loping charisma. He'd sort of amble around, always looking like he had plenty of time, but he was quite charismatic. And then he became famous for dating all these glamorous women like Madonna and Fiona Apple and various models and things. Every time he did endurance stuff, there always seemed to be a gorgeous woman waiting for him at the end of it, looking really worried. Oh God, what state's he going to come back in?
Yeah.
Anyway, that was it.
So, okay. We could, you covered it in a lot more detail in your episode. The buried alive one, how long was he under the ground?
7 days.
Again? 7 days. How did he breathe? Do you know?
Yeah, they obviously had some sort of tube, and then they had a tube for him to pee as well. But obviously he wasn't eating, so he wasn't producing too much.
Yeah, okay.
So that was generally the deal they had there. They'd always have they'd always have tubes, and he had just enough to survive, basically. Yeah.
Okay. And what did he say about that experience?
Just that it was an incredible learning experience in that, and I could totally get that. I think people who like him or can tap into him, they can understand that when you take everything away, you gain a completely different perspective. I mean, he must be a meditator. Obviously, we've talked about meditation. There's no doubt in my mind. And when I look at his reading list, it's quite similar to mine. And we've obviously read a lot of the same books and stuff. I just think you learn a lot by having all the distractions taken away, really. That life is actually, I'd say with the one with the box, he said, life is just a series of sunrises and sunsets. Obviously it's a bit more modern life, it's a bit more complicated than that. When you really actually boil it down, we live in a very complicated society that's made complicated. But when it comes down to it, there's trees and there's breathing and there's, or not breathing in his case, and, sunrises and sunsets and smiles from people. That was what sustained him because, he was isolated in these times, but he said he would get off on, seeing little kids, staring in when he was buried alive. Go, oh, what's going on there? Same as when they receive magic as well. So I think that's what he likes, He's not trying to connect with people.
I just can't imagine what that would be like. I mean, if anyone's got any feelings of claustrophobia, then obviously that would be completely impossible. But just lying still like that for 7 days and not eating, I mean, absolutely incredible, really. And the ice one, so he was encased in a block of ice. So I guess they kind of hollowed out a large block of ice, right? I'm not sure, but I guess they hollowed it out so there was a space inside this huge block of ice, and he went inside and stood inside it for 3 straight days. Yeah,
standing up, of course, as well.
Standing up, but like 72 hours. Is that 3 days?
I think it was supposed to be...
Hold on. Sorry.
It was a bit less.
My maths.
72 hours is 3 days, but I think it was supposed to be... it was supposed to be 61 or something, and they had to take him out about 2 hours from the end. Of course, he thought that to him that was a terrible failure. But there was obviously a gap. He wasn't touching the ice, and it's hard to know how cold it was. Obviously, one of the things about him that maybe people got a bit bored with, including me, was that he'd always say, "I'm cheating death." He kept saying, "Oh, I could die." I mean, I was always pretty sure that I don't think David Blaine's in the business of dying for his art necessarily. But he was a pretty crazy guy. He was into testing the limits, and there was an interesting thing with the box as well, because his mother had died of cancer, and he was very, very close to his mother. I think his father had left when he was very young. It's very close to his mother, and his mother had died quite an agonizing death over a number of months. And he said, oh, she never complained once, And in the box, he actually had a picture of his mother. And I have a theory that maybe what he was doing in a funny way was reenacting the suffering of his mother. If you think about it, just getting progressively weaker and weaker, but using her as his inspiration. So, obviously, I mean, he's a very rich guy. He's got a brand. David Blaine is a brand. So I'm sure there's a business savvy side to him as well. But I like to think that there is that other side, that it is personally cathartic for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't think he was risking his life, but I think he was taking it to the limit. The other one, was the breath hold. He was actually in. He stayed for a week. I can't remember he was in some sort of pod. No, it was like a glass bowl almost.
A kind of a goldfish bowl
like
kind of thing,
goldfish bowl. Yeah.
Huge goldfish bowl, and he was submerged in it with breathing apparatus so he could breathe. But he was basically under the water for how long was it? A week.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when I've been in the bath for about 20 minutes, my finger, when we lie in the bath or in a swimming pool or something for about 20 minutes, your fingers start to go all wrinkly.
Prune, yeah.
They go into they prune, look like prunes. So God knows what happened to him after 7 days, submerged in water. I mean, he
Well, there's pictures of him. Yeah, we could put some links if you want. And they just went completely white. His feet and his fingers was just like totally white, and it was quite gruesome. But what he did with that one, that was the last one that I was probably really interested in. That was the one after the starvation one, and he was trying to break the breath hold record, but of course he's an enormous handicap because he'd spent a week underwater already, and then the producers decided to make it more fun. They were going to put a load of chains on him, like they would have done with Houdini, because Houdini's basically his hero as well. So the breath hold started. He was already under a massive handicap, and then he had to release all these chains from his feet and hands, just to make it more and more difficult. And of course, he didn't break the breath hold. Still did whatever he did, 7 minutes. Incredible.
So he spent 7 days under the water, and then after that 7-day experience, he decided to try to break the world
breath hold
record for holding your breath with chains on him as well. What?
I know, it's just silly.
It's a bit much.
It's silly. But then he did manage to break the record with apparently allowed to breathe pure oxygen. There's a separate record. And he did something like 19 minutes on one breath on the Oprah show. I think it was 19, something like that, 17, 18, 19.
Yeah, it was extraordinary, and quite stressful to watch because at the very end, after he'd broken the record and he's still holding his breath, and you kind of think, what's going on inside his body after that time? And you know how desperate you get when we've all done it. We've all been in the bath. We've all dunked our head under the water and tried to hold our breath, and you get to a point where you sort of stress out a bit and you quickly, get to the surface and start breathing again. So after 19 minutes, the level of stress must have been unbearable, I imagine. He
did a TED talk about it, and it described it in quite a lot of detail. I think the thing that is interesting about all these stunts is that we can all relate to them in a very small way, because, probably we've all had some kind of confinement, probably only for a minute or whatever. We've all been very cold, I imagine. So that was the ice one. We all know what heights are like, when you're a kid and you go to a high building and you have that exciting but terrifying feeling of heights. And then we've probably all had a time we haven't been able to eat. So, we can all identify in a small way. I think the breath hold. I suppose when you're a kid, when I was a kid, I used to like breathing, holding my breath. Sorry. So I think I identified him a bit because I've always tested myself in small ways, nothing like that. But I don't know. Again, just saying that it is genuine. I think he is showing that we our limits are much further than we think. And you should test yourself a little bit.
Yeah, that we can be pushed quite far, and that we do have quite a lot in ourselves. I remember that after Well, when I was on holiday with my wife in Indonesia in, I don't know what year, it was a few years ago, and one of the things that we realised we could do on one of these islands was climb this mountain. It's an active volcano, and it's, you know, when you go to these places, there's like a number of different things that you can do as a tourist. You know, there's like this kind of trip, this, you know, this backpacking adventure thing you can go on, and one of them was climbing Mount Rinjani, which is an active volcano on one of the Indonesian islands, Lombok. And it was like, oh, it's going to be a 3-day thing. We can do some camping while we're doing it. This sounds like it could be fun. It turned out to be a real ordeal, like a really, really hard thing to do. Climbing up in really hot weather. The thing is covered in volcanic dust. And so you kind of climb up, you go 2 steps up and you slide down another step. You know, like what it's like climbing up a sand dune. So it was like that. The thing is 3,726 meters up to the peak. We climbed all the way up to the top over about 2.5 days. But it was a really, really, really difficult thing, like one of the most difficult things we've done. It's like a benchmark for the two of us. It's like, well, you know, this, if you think this is difficult, remember we climbed Mount Rinjani, so we can do this. But just climbing up the foothills was difficult. There was like, we call them the 7 hills now, because there were these 7 horrible hills that you had to climb up. And even just to get to the beginning almost, you get to the crater rim, and then from there there's a climb up to the peak that you have to do first thing in the morning. And yeah, you kind of think, I'm exhausted, but then you keep going, you know, you just have to keep going. You try not to look all the way up to the top. You try not to see the whole climb. You just do it step by step, which is a thing I learned from doing that sometimes you have to just get your head down and focus on the next step. And if you can get the next step, you can then get the step after that, rather than trying to see the whole thing as one big one big challenge. And also we learned that your body, if you ask your body to do things, it will do it for you. You know, you might think you're tired, but you know, you can keep going, and your body has these extra reserves. Yeah, so that was an interesting learning experience. Yeah. Okay, right. David Blaine. Yeah, the ice one. Going back to the ice one again. One of the things that struck me that I remember about that is that they had to cut him out of the ice, right? I don't know if that was a dramatic ending that they planned in advance. It's hard to know, isn't it? But as you said, like, because he was sort of delusional at that point through exhaustion. I don't know if that was because of the cold of the ice and whatever, but he was hallucinating, he said. And didn't he, as they were using chainsaws to cut the ice open, because he didn't know what was going on, he was trying to grab the blade of the chainsaw and stuff. Yeah,
that the Rogan clip's very good. If you could find that one, he was properly losing the plot. Yeah, he went to grab it apparently, but obviously, you know, he's got people around him. He's got 3 or 4 guys, and they understand that this could happen. You know, you can get in that state where you're a bit confused. But I think the ice one was the one he actually said he would never do again, like under any circumstances. I think that and the starvation is probably were the hardest ones. I think the one on the pillar is very difficult, but he trained for a year. You know, that's the thing. He did a lot of training. He's very into physical training, but I think the box one, the starvation one, I think he actually said that's messed up his metabolism forever.
Really, permanently. Yeah, it's not a good idea. I mean, they say that fasting is you know, can be healthy and stuff like that, but obviously what he did was so extreme. Yeah, that's damaging. That's damaging to your body, isn't it? Like, the one final thing about David Blaine before we move on to the next thing. Didn't Paul McCartney? Isn't there a Paul McCartney connection to this? Isn't there a story where Paul McCartney was on a night out? Yeah. And he ended up going down to see Dave. Oh, just go down and see David Blaine in the box. Didn't Paul McCartney go and see him?
Yeah, and he was either drunk or stoned. It was one of the two, or maybe both. And he was going, "What's that silly dude?" Something like that. Paul was being really, really belligerent, apparently. And David Blaine,
Really?
they asked David Blaine, he said, I was asleep at the time, so I didn't see it. Yeah, but it's funny that it's so random, isn't it? Paul McCartney would go down there. Obviously, there were quite a few celebs getting some photo opportunities there as well. But yeah, Paul was there.
Interesting. Paul goes down. Oh, David Blaine in a box. What's he doing?
Yeah.
Okay, right. So our next subject is kind of connected to what we've just talked about, is the subject of food. So I guess my question is, do you watch what you eat? Do you have a particular diet?
I don't have a particular diet, but yes, I've been conscious of food and how it affects your mental health as well for many years now. That was part of one of my journeys. I always find I have a complicated relationship with food. I always find that when I'm in control of my life, I seem to be able to control my diet. It could be the other way around, in fact, really. But yeah, when I'm not in control, when I'm stressed and everything, I find I just snack more and more. And because I've never been really a massive drinker. Obviously, when I was young, I went through the usual phase that you would have in England, going out and stuff. But yeah, I do. Probably the most interesting thing I could say about this is that in about 2010, I was living in Thailand and I put on a load of weight. And because I'd been back in England over Christmas enjoying myself. And I got back to Thailand and my girlfriend at the time, I think we were talking on part one about having a really brutal sense of humor. She was like, "Oh, look at you, how fat you are now." She just came out with that. All right, thank you, darling. And so I decided to do something about it, and I got a load of raw food audio books and podcasts and stuff and started binging them. For about 6 months, I went about 80% raw. And I was also exercising because I lived right by a gym. And me being me, of course, I had to take it one step further. Not only was I doing all that, but I was emulating Robert De Niro in Raging Bull, and was also jogging in the steam room after my workout. Because you got to go.
Right, that's where he's like, just give me just a little bit of ice, just on the tongue.
Yeah,
just give me. Yeah.
Just thought I'd go the whole hog. But what I learned about food is that it's something very interesting. Well, I learned quite a lot about the industry, and it's so horrifying if you really look at it properly. The food industry.
The food industry.
Yeah, what's being put in our food and stuff. It's so horrifying that I won't divulge too much here. But I learned that as I was eating less, I was feeling less hungry, and I thought, that's not the way it's supposed to work, is it? So I started doing a bit of research, and I was researching. There's a thing called excitotoxins, which are things that basically they put in food, biscuits and crisps and things like that. That excites your nervous system, and just makes you more hungry. I mean, they make a joke of it, don't they? What was it? Pringles. Once you pop, you can't stop. I mean, there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
So rather than actually go on a diet, I suppose it was a diet, a raw food diet, and I learned a hell of a lot. Yeah, and since then, wouldn't say my diet's perfect by any means, but my weight has traditionally fluctuated up and down. But yeah, I think the thing about it is that we always focus on physical weight, don't we? But I think food has a massive effect on your mental health as well.
Yeah, sugar, for example. They put sugar in lots of different food, and that obviously gives you an instant sort of energy kick, an instant sort of, your body has an instant positive response to it. But then, you get caught in that sort of cycle of, then your body expects it. It's a sort of an addictive substance, isn't it? Really,
absolutely.
And you can be caught in a cycle of sort of addiction to sugar, where even just you have your meal and then you have that feeling afterwards where you just feel like, I need something sweet now. So that's something to be aware of, I suppose.
People just want to do a little experiment and learn a bit more. Just have a look at products in your supermarket and just check the packets and see how much sugar there is in there. It's absolutely crazy. And I mean, just recently having this illness, I started drinking fruit juice. But after a while, I couldn't drink it because it's just too sugary. There's way more sugar. It's going up and up and up and up. And refined sugar really is the most addictive substance in the world, in my opinion. And everybody is basically addicted to it, whether they realize it or not. Everybody has a certain amount of refined sugar in their diet every single day. I mean, you can't help it unless you get proper organic food and things. So that's really something to bear in mind. Yeah, because there's simple sugar and there's refined sugar. And you like to think that in an apple or an orange, you're getting simple sugar that you need. But there's no way we need as much sugar as we have. No way. It's not that necessary. But it's just highly addictive. And things like chocolate bars and hot dogs and hamburgers, I mean, they're genius creations of addiction, basically. And it is addiction. Let's call it that. We're all pretty much addicted to refined sugar, unless you make a really, really massive effort. But I mean, it's just in everything. It's in carrots and bread and things like that. Things that you wouldn't expect. You just find sugar everywhere.
Yeah, bread. I mean, when I go to the supermarket, living in France, one of the advantages is that the boulangeries do sell pretty good bread. I mean, it's like homemade bread. You can get some like really good bread varieties using whole wheat and other types of cereals and stuff, and it's really good quality stuff. It is because after about 24 hours it's gone hard and you can't eat it anymore. It's not like bread that I often find in the supermarkets in England. I'll go to the supermarket and I'm looking for nice bread, and all the packets of bread, the sliced loaves which are in plastic bags. You look at I'm searching through the ingredients trying to find ones that don't have, a lot of sugar in them, because you can often find sugar in the ingredients list. They add that to add flavour to the bread, and other things that will preserve the bread. Like that bread lasts all week. A loaf of bread will last you all week. I mean, I'm not an expert, of course, on nutrition and stuff like that, but I think, it's a bit suspicious. I feel a bit suspicious when a loaf of bread that you've bought lasts all week and it doesn't start to go mouldy or start to go hard. Now, obviously, it's inconvenient when your bread, when you pull it out of the cupboard and it's got little bits of green mould in it and you've got to throw it away. But if the bread does grow mould after a few days, or at least it goes hard or something after a few days, that's sort of normal. That's what bread should do, really. But when it's not and it stays fresh for ages, then they've probably done something funny to it which keeps it fresh. Preservatives. Yeah.
There's an experiment. Do you remember the guy who ate McDonald's for a month? I think his name's Morgan Spurlock.
That film Super Size Me. I used to use that in English lessons sometimes. I built some English learning materials from it, and I remember doing a few classes where we would do maybe the morning session would be about that, and it's like discussion, language work, listening comprehension. Everyone can relate to the subject of McDonald's and stuff like that. And the story talks about how the documentary is that he chooses to eat McDonald's as a challenge. He eats meals from McDonald's for every 3 meals a day, all from McDonald's for a long time. And then we see what happens to his body, and it's quite horrific, really. But then every single time I did that lesson, it would be, we'd stop for lunch, and after lunch I'd say to everyone, right, did you have a nice lunch? And I'd say, who had McDonald's? And like loads of them would say, oh yeah, we went to McDonald's, because I don't know what it is about McDonald's and the marketing of it. Just looking at the products, looking at the name and looking at the logo and stuff made people want to go and eat it, even though the documentary showed what it did to his health. But yes, Morgan Spurlock, Super Size Me. What were you going to say?
We did an experiment. It's on YouTube, I think. There's a video where he kept, I think it was a burger from a burger shop, and then a McDonald's burger, and then chips from a proper chip shop, and then McDonald's French fries, and he kept them all under a plastic container, and he was checking on them. He left them at room temperature in his office, and he was checking on them every 2 weeks. And obviously there was the way he delivered it was quite comedic. And he said, oh, let's have a look after 2 weeks. And there was mold growing off the proper burger. And I won't go into the details, but by I can't remember if it was something like 4 weeks, maybe even 6 weeks. And the kicker was that the McDonald's French fries had not altered, like, at all. Like, not at all. They looked exactly the same. Presumably, you could have eaten them. And that is quite scary if you think about it. What was it? 4 weeks, 6 weeks, something like that. Yeah, they had not altered, not at all.
Yeah, not changed at all. Yeah, I used to joke with my friends that McDonald's, that in the back of the McDonald's, they just had like these tubs of stuff, and they would just pour this stuff into machines and then pull different levers, and different products would come out. It's just like this McDonald's matter that they would pour into like the McDonald's machine, and then ka-chung, milkshake, ka-chung, French fries, ka-chung, burger. Obviously, they say in McDonald's that it's made from 100% beef. Their burgers are made from 100% beef. All right, but what part? 100% beef means 100% cow. Right, but doesn't say what they did to the cow before they turned it into the burger, and which parts of the cow they're using. Yeah.
There's another famous clip of Jamie Oliver. He did a thing called Jamie's School Dinners in England.
Yeah.
And there's a famous clip where he's explaining to kids. Again, I haven't checked this. I'll take him at his word. How nuggets are made. And he said, so he has this raw chicken. He says, right, what bits of a chicken can you eat? So they say, breasts, the legs, etc. The meat, yeah. So he cuts those off, and all he's got left is this horrible carcass. And then he explains how they make it, and they stick it in a blender, and then they, it gets softened. They make it into patties. They add all the flavorings and to make it smell nice, and then deep fry it, and that's how you get nuggets, apparently. And all the children are going, but of course at the end he says, is anyone going to stop eating nuggets? And they're like, no. Because he said that it's not because they're stupid, it's because it's the pull of it. But I mean, I stopped eating McDonald's and Burger King years and years ago. And all it takes is just to stop for a bit. And I'm sure you wouldn't miss it that much. Yeah.
But they're very clever, they just happen to be in the right place at the right time, McDonald's, where you've been out, maybe you've been out, you might have had a beer or two, and you're hungry, and there's nowhere else to get food, and of course there's a McDonald's within walking distance. In fact, it's on the way home. I'll just pop in. It's open. It's really easy to get food from there. You don't even need to you don't really even need to interact with a person. You just press a few buttons on the screen, and then someone hands it over to you. So they've kind of arranged things to make us keep going back.
Oh yeah, it's very clever, but it's pretty evil as well, really. The food industry, like I say, it depends how deeply you want to look into it. Probably wouldn't recommend people go too deep, but it's frightening, really frightening.
There you go, listeners. Little advert there for McDonald's. Other fast food restaurants are available.
Yeah.
Let's move from talking about food to talking about films. Is there a connection? Food is stuff you eat with your mouth. Films, do we eat films with our eyes? I don't know. I don't know if I'm just trying to make a connection. Films, then. Okay. Now, I'm not going to ask you what's your favourite film. Well, I already know as well, but that's one of those questions that's actually really difficult to answer. But what are some of your favourite films?
Shall I just say what my favourite film is anyway?
Or what's your Or what films have you enjoyed recently, or what at the moment is your favourite film?
Well, I do have a flick chart actually. I filled it in. I'm pretty confident I've got every film I've ever watched on it now. And let's have a look at the total. 1,529. Not bad. Yes, Raging Bull is at the top. It's a film.
Raging Bull.
Yeah, it's a Martin Scorsese film from 1980 with Robert De Niro that I mentioned earlier, related to boxing. But that period of films, Easy Riders, Raging Bulls period, as it's called by some people.
The sort of the late 60s through to the late 70s, basically. right? Sort of American cinema from that period. We think of films by Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola, and who else?
Well, Spielberg's in there, George Lucas, Brian De Palma, those kind of people.
Yeah, okay. All right. Now, I've got in my list, actually, The Shining, because you've talked about The Shining quite a lot before. And The Shining, directed by Stanley Kubrik, actually 1980, isn't it? Jack Nicholson is the star of the film. It describes... It's the story of a writer who goes to stay in an unoccupied hotel somewhere in the United States, some amazing mountainous area of, is it like Colorado or something? Yeah. And he stays in the hotel, which is basically unoccupied, because it's off season. Is that right? And he's there with his family, his wife and his young son, and he goes there to write, but then he kind of slowly goes mad. In this huge hotel, kind of more or less on his own, trying to write. And so much has been said and written about The Shining. It's based on a novel by Stephen King, although it's quite different to the novel, I understand.
Yeah, right.
So what's so special about The Shining, do you think?
I mean, The Shining's never been one of my really favourite films. I can admire it quite a bit, and Kubrick would be... I forgot to mention Kubrick. I mean, he was involved in that 70s period, although obviously he came from an earlier period, but he was still around, he was doing Clockwork Orange and Shining and so forth. I think my interest was piqued by our mutual friend, Rob Ager, who's become kind of a mate of mine now. And in fact, I stayed over at his house last summer in Liverpool.
Nice.
I had a fun time, yeah. He started doing these videos in about 2008 or 9, talking about things like how the rooms didn't properly match up in The Shining.
The rooms of the hotel.
Rooms of the hotel didn't match up, and so because you see a fair amount of the hotel at the beginning when Jack and his wife are being shown around by the manager, and then later on, obviously, they're stuck in this hotel, so they're moving around it quite a bit. He pointed that out, and then he pointed out that there was a gold connection, which is related to the history of gold in America. And then there may even be something related to the Native American genocide as well, because they say at the beginning that the hotel was built on Indian burial ground. There's music, there's certain artwork on the walls. Yeah, and I think for me it became perhaps more interesting than watching the film itself. I haven't watched the film through actually for years. It's a puzzle, I quite like these cavernous buildings. The idea of a really labyrinthine rooms and things like that. And I think it was the mystery element of what's actually going on. I've always been attracted to that. What's really going on behind closed doors. And there's other ideas that The Shining is, that with this Native American thing, Jack is essentially signing the Declaration of Independence. It's a bit complicated story, but
so I should just say that we're talking about the fact that The Shining, people say that there are lots of hidden meanings in it, or meanings which are not that obvious, but which, when you look very carefully, Kubrick has intentionally put little symbolic things in, and which mean that the film is actually about something much larger or something else. And some people have said, it's about the story of the Native Americans and how they were treated in the United States, or that it's about the moon landing, or that it's about other things, that it's something about the history of gold in America, as you just mentioned, and some other things like that. So you're referring to one particular point in the film that seems to represent that Jack is writing the Declaration of Independence. I haven't heard this one before.
Declaration of Independence, yeah. I'm a bit rusty on the details, to be honest. There's so many videos. I mean, obviously, if you look online, you can find. I mean, I'd go to Rob's ones first, basically, because he's pretty solid all the way. And also, of course, it's just remarkably creepy. with the two twins, and the story doesn't really make any sense at all. If you watch the film, there are things that happen. You think, well, how could that possibly happen? And then you put it down to ghosts, and you say, well, okay, so is any of it real? Is Jack Torrance real even? So it's not really a puzzle that you could complete. But there's a definite, there's such a creepy vibe about it. And the idea that, maybe this hotel, it always made me think, actually, when I stay in a hotel, if you stay in a hotel room, you think, how many people have stayed in this room before? And what's gone on, Could be anybody who stayed in this room before this. There's a whole history to a hotel. And I think that's the fascination. And, like I said, these cavernous rooms and these corridors and everything. And of course, without giving the ending away too much, they do this fabulous trick with a photo, don't they, from the past, which proves that maybe Jack Torrance has always been there. But I like the way they use jaunty 1940s, midnight. Da, 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 da. I always find that very sinister. If you play this sort of jaunty 40s music in the right atmosphere.
It does create, sinister juxtaposition. Yeah, I mean, simply as a work of film direction, it's incredibly clever the way he creates this atmosphere where things just don't feel right. And Kubrick was very meticulous as a director. And so all of those things were probably intentional. Like, as you say, the design of the hotel that you see, there are quite a lot of establishing shots of the hotel, or moments where we see, the hotel, and we get to know the layout of the hotel to some extent. And then there are some moments where we follow the characters as they walk through the corridors, and you realize that they enter a room that has a window with light shining through it, and you realize, wait a minute, this isn't possible. It's not possible for there to be a window that shines light in from this position. And you might not realize it when you first watch it, but it does give you a sense of unease and a sense of things being quite strange and weird. So all of these little touches, have led people to interpret the film in all sorts of different ways. I watched that documentary with my brother recently. It's called Room 237. It's quite a famous documentary. A lot of people say that it's nonsense. A lot of those ideas, and they will posit other sort of interpretations of the film instead. But it's just interesting that there's such wildly different interpretations of what the film means. It's fascinating.
Well, it's an interesting microcosm of maybe something we'll talk about later, which is alternative theories and conspiracy theories. Because in that world that I know pretty well, again, it's just a mixture of credible ones and ridiculous ones. I mean, that's
let's go on to talk about that. That's the next item on my list, which is conspiracy theories. The question that I actually have is, I think most people listening will know what a conspiracy theory is. Most people understand the term to mean basically the idea that it's hard to define it.
Just the idea that two or more people have got together in a secret way and planned something. And essentially, I'd like to just talk briefly about the history of it because I think it's important. But and nowadays, see, I prefer the term alternative explanation because it doesn't come so loaded. That if you take an example that everyone can get on board with, which is the killing of John F. Kennedy in November 1963. I don't know what the latest figures are, but definitely the majority of Americans believe that there is at least something else going on. That Lee Harvey Oswald didn't act alone. So conspiracy could have been between the mafia, could have been between his political enemies, Cubans. It could be various people because it was a very, very strange time, the early 60s. But it's always a strange time in politics. But it's the idea that the official story that we're given may not be everything we need to know or anything we need to know, in fact.
The official story of that being that Lee Harvey Oswald was the only gunman, and that from the window of the book depository building, he managed to assassinate President Kennedy. And the reasons given, what in the official version of that story, what are the reasons given for him doing it? What were the motives?
Again, this is so complicated, but I mean, he may have been a communist or a communist sympathizer. Would it be really a political assassination? Yeah, funnily enough, thinking about it, he didn't really have a chance to give a clear motive because, of course, he was killed himself live on television.
Yeah.
But yeah, people would say it was to do with the political leanings of JFK, but yeah, that's a really good question because I don't know. I don't know if anyone's actually come up with a really good motive for Lee Harvey Oswald. I mean, we know he defected to Russia, but then JFK was supposed to be soft on. They always call it soft on communism when you're trying to build a decent relationship with the USSR. Yeah, that's actually a good question.
But it's probably, generally speaking, the understanding is that Lee Harvey Oswald was a communist, an enemy of America, working with the Soviets, and that he had become an agent of the Soviets. And so it was basically America's enemies killing the president, and that's it. Right? But maybe the alternative ideas suggest that it could have been an inside job, that maybe there were forces inside the United States who disagreed with JFK and the direction he was taking with the country, and that that in fact they're the ones who killed him, I suppose. Yeah,
there's a big debate about whether JFK was anti-Vietnam or anti-American involvement in Vietnam, that he was trying to pull them out. I've listened to debates, and I mean, there's people arguing passionately on both sides. Can I just talk about the term itself? Because I think this is really the salient point. So as far as I know, okay, if you take let's take the pre-JFK assassination. Let's say we're in the 50s, or whatever. The term conspiracy theory was in use. It was a thing, and it seems like people would talk about things like that. Like let's just say Americans, for example, would talk about, who really killed Abraham Lincoln? Was it John Wilkes Booth? What was the American Civil War really about? And people used to be able to talk about this, maybe over coffee and brandy or whatever it was after dinner. And those are the kind of discussions that, I don't really have them anymore, but I used to have those with friends as well. And there was no stigma involved. It was just, oh, that's curious. I wonder if that was that or that wasn't that, But what happened was after JFK was killed, and there was clearly or very quickly a backlash, even before we saw the famous Zapruder film, which wasn't seen until the mid-70s. What happened was that there's a CIA document that I read years ago, and it was to do with using the phrase conspiracy theorist as a pejorative, as a kind of an accusation, to say that someone who thinks like that is, a bit unhinged.
Mad person who wears a tinfoil hat.
Yeah, so all these stereotypes were created and everything, and we do know there's a thing called Operation Mockingbird, which again is a thing. That? It's not a theory. It was a CIA operation in that they planted operatives into the media to plant trigger words and to, weave newspapers towards stories that were, going to shape the world the way that the CIA wanted to shape it.
And that's not just a theory or a speculation. No, that's provable.
That's a real thing. Operation Mockingbird. Yeah. And to cut a long story short, so this thing was entirely created, whereby someone becomes a conspiracy theorist and just becomes a person who, with no evidence at all, is just looking for conspiracies. And then there's been all these academic papers. And I had a discussion with a guy on Life and Life Only, who'd been involved with a paper that said that people who believe conspiracy theories have had insecure attachments as a child. Of course, the big question comes, well, maybe if I believe that, maybe I've got an insecure attachment as a child, or maybe I did some research and found that a lot of it was true. And that's a bit of a radical idea. But anyway, so this is just carried on and on and on. And the problem is, it's like anything. when you hear intelligent people on TV ridiculing it and talking about tinfoil hats and things, it suddenly has a lot of credibility. And so, but it's just been planted deliberately in the culture. And I've had conversations with people where we're talking about something and I present a bit of evidence and they're fairly open-minded and they kind of go with it. Let's say about 9/11. Okay. I mean, I don't think 9/11 was necessarily an inside job, but there's no way if you research more than half an hour that you're not going to think there's something at least slightly strange, and there's 40 or 50 anomalies that build up. Anyway, you could be having a discussion with somebody, and then as soon as you reach the point where they think, oh yeah, maybe he's talking about conspiracy, they sort of shy away. I've had this so many times where they get a little smirk on their face and suddenly it's a place that you can't go. So what's happened is this phrase has been used to brilliantly shut down debates. It's like almost having an allergic reaction. That's why I think it's been planted, because it's created a reaction in people. So really, my angle is not about JFK or Princess Diana. I mean, if you want one that just seems like a slam dunk to me, the death of David Kelly, the weapons inspector, 2003.
Right. So we need a bit of context for that. Yeah. 2003, the USA and the UK and probably some other countries, I can't remember exactly which ones, decided to, how shall I put it, invade Iraq and remove Saddam Hussein. Mm-hmm. And they presented it as a way to prevent terrorism. Mm. And they said that there was evidence that in Iraq they had access to weapons of mass destruction. Mm. The idea being that Saddam Hussein supported terrorists and that terrorists would be able to get their hands on like nuclear weapons or something similar and do something like 9/11 but on a much larger scale. And so we need to go in, and we've done it. We've got the intelligence reports. They do have weapons of mass destruction, so we're going to go in and do the right thing. That's the kind of context. And David Kelly was an expert, a weapons inspector. What happened?
Yeah, well, he was involved with a report which was basically saying that they didn't have that, and
the report said that they didn't find weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah, and then there was a big scandal with this sexed up dossier that said that I think it was the 45-minute claim, wasn't it, that Saddam could blow up the world in 45 minutes essentially. Again, a bit sketchy on the details, unfortunately, but and he was under a lot of pressure, and then suddenly he was found dead in the woods, and he'd actually taken an overdose and cut his wrists as well. And there's a whole story to it, but it was interesting to see in real time something like that happening, because we don't know what it was like when John F. Kennedy was killed, but that was one that was happening in real time. And the way that it just, because of the news cycle, it's a story for a while, but then the news cycle moves on so quickly that it gets forgotten. But what happened was, I think it was a Liberal MP, Norman Baker, started his own investigation. And I haven't read his book, but I've heard on good authority it's a good book. And he found that he almost certainly didn't kill himself, that something else happened. But, I heard a friend of mine posted a clip around the time on his podcast, or it must have been a few years later, of these people on a BBC radio program. And it's just the smugness of this guy's tone. He was going, oh yeah, conspiracy theorist. When you listen to the tone of these people and how dismissive they are, and you have to marvel at what a well-created phrase it is to just shut down debate, because it's just so easy, isn't it?
But it is also clever in the sense that, to an extent, there are certain. We all have seen videos or have heard people talking about ideas, and so there are some people who clearly just seem to make stuff up.
Oh yeah, sure.
And their approach is they've decided that things are not as they seem, and then they seem to just pluck evidence out of nowhere, and they just seem to make stuff up, right? And these sort of people who, I don't know, that you just see even conversations on the Joe Rogan podcast with certain guests that he has, and they're talking about chemtrails or they're talking about the moon landings or whatever. And these people just say, oh, they did this, they're doing this. And they're just pulling this stuff out of nowhere. They're essentially just speculating and then deciding that those speculations are real, you know. And so there's kind of like good alternative approaches to seeing things, and kind of like the other side, which is people who have absolutely no rigor or no method, no commitment to a proper process of using evidence and all the rest of it. And those are the examples that people have in their minds when they hear the term conspiracy theory. They think about a nutter who is just making it all up on their own and just creative thinking. And people will say that these people just they actually, it's wishful thinking, that these people want there to be someone controlling it all out of some desire to be living in a world in which is under control, you know, that they want to imagine that the world is under someone's control and that it's not all just sort of random or something, you know. So there's those sorts of people who have those sorts of ideas and present their ideas in that kind of way, and they sort of spoil it for everyone else in a way, you know. And, you know, another example is the Paul is dead conspiracy, or the Paul is dead idea. You know, people saying that Paul McCartney died in 1966 and he was replaced by a body double because the establishment decided that if the world lost the Beatles, that it would be too bad for the economy, basically, and that lots of teenagers would be devastated, and, you know, so they decided to keep the whole thing going, you know, with a body double. But I mean, you know, I think it's ridiculous, and I've thought about it and considered it quite a lot, I think, and considered the evidence that I've seen in some of those videos that have been presented, and it becomes very irritating where you'll be looking at Beatles videos or interviews with Paul, and there's always people in the comments saying, oh, this is the fake Paul, this is Paul, and it's just like, oh, this is so annoying, you know. It just becomes irritating. So there's that category of the sort of ridiculous nonsense. But yeah, that has been used, the term has been used to kind of lump in those people, maybe with people who have perhaps more reasonable alternative approaches.
Yeah, researchers.
You know, so
researchers.
It's been, researchers, people who actually, you know, use the right methods. So it's all been mixed in together. And so, yeah, that's, again, why conspiracy theory or conspiracy theorist is such a powerful term, is because you say that and instantly people just, you know, imagine that we're talking about these kind of people who've got no method at all.
I want to make it clear, I agree with you. Yeah, there are people out there who do, you know, chase conspiracy theories and make them up. I wasn't saying that they were all credible. I'm just saying, like, as you said, they'd be lumped in. And there's no middle ground. You know, there are people who basically believe mainstream news, probably scan it for 10 minutes a day. Then on the very, very other extreme, you've got people who just think it's all lies. But then there is this space in the middle, and there are credible researchers, you know, a couple of whom I've talked to on my podcast even, you know, so it's just, but I think the danger for me, the danger is that the people who just reject it all, they're being kept innocent, really, in a way, and not being encouraged to look at things for themselves. Because if you can just dismiss everything you don't see on mainstream news as a conspiracy theory, you're basically saying in your mind, oh, well, they're telling me everything I need to know. I don't need to do any work myself. Whereas I think people should be working hard. I know we're working hard anyway with other things, but we're not working hard, but we're working
we're all struggling in our lives in some way.
Yeah, but I think people should put in the work to nuance their worldview and check different sources and things like that.
Interesting stuff. I had a conversation with some flat Earth guys once on their podcast. That was an interesting experience. Just because, you know, it's not every day that you get the chance to to talk to some guys who think the Earth is flat. It was really interesting. They didn't convince me, but you start to get down to a level where you're talking about mathematical formulas, and how do you actually prove that the Earth is round? And in just a one-to-one conversation, it becomes a philosophical discussion, and it becomes very hard to actually prove it. I found it really hard to actually just using my layperson's knowledge to actually to lay the evidence out to them in a way that could actually convince them. They tried the same thing with me, and they didn't succeed. But ultimately, it does, to an extent, come down to your choices, how you choose to see the world. They had decided that the Earth was flat. I found that really, I've talked to you about this before. That's the thing I wish I'd said to them. Because their podcast is called the Flat Earth Podcast. But they're always saying that they're on a mission to talk about the truth. Right? And in my opinion, their approach was, right, the Earth is flat. Let's find ways to concoct evidence or concoct theories to prove that the Earth is flat, rather than let's just find out what the shape of the Earth is. So I wish I'd said to them, so, are you interested in searching for the real shape of the Earth? Are you really interested in searching for the truth? And of course, I think they would have said yes. And then my killer blow would have been, so why is the show called the Flat Earth Podcast? It seems to me that you've decided it's flat, and now you're just finding ways to kind of back that up. And some of the ways that they'd chosen, they were just literally pulling every single possible thing they could that would prove that the Earth was flat. And a lot of these things they were pulling in were completely contradictory and incongruous with each other. And not backed up by real things. Like one of them was saying, oh yeah, I'm building a model of the universe in my back garden, right, as a way of proving it. And it's like, are you really building? So how big is the sun? I didn't ask them these things. I wish I had. How big is the sun? Let's say it's the size of a basketball. All right, so if that's the case, then to make it really scientifically accurate, you'd have to have a massive back garden, because even if the sun is the size of a basketball, the distance between the sun and the Earth, in scale, would be like quite far away down the road. So anyway, it was very interesting.
That's quite a extreme example, though, isn't it? Flat Earth. I think.
Again, another that's on the sort of that side that I was talking about before. But flat Earth is it's very interesting, because you kind of think, why is it that people have decided that the Earth is flat? I think it's just that I don't know really. I don't know. Why do you think?
I mean, they could be planted, for all we know. I think these things are put in there just to discredit the whole deal. But there are wacky people out there, I mean, I think in every walk of life, you get people who are seeking attention, people who are hoping someone else will tell them what's what, and then people who like to try and find things out for themselves. So, like I say, I mean, if you look at the news, it's a bit like the food industry. It's how far you want to go into it. You can skim the surface and have a quick look at what's in the packet, and then buy it. Same with the news. You can have a quick look at the headlines and say, "Oh, that happened. Oh, I'm basically informed." Or you can go deeper. But you're always in everything. You're always going to get different types of people, and that's just This is just a reflection of it, really. But there's so many credible alternative researchers out there. I mean, I could give you 100 names, and there's so much more to know. That's it. The idea that in this complex, unbelievably complex world where stuff is happening every single second, 24 hours a day, with obviously different time zones and things, the idea that you could just turn on the TV and watch a news bulletin and think, oh, well, they've just picked everything I need to know for my own good. That's fine. That seems as absurd as saying everything is a lie, The truth is obviously somewhere in the middle, but I don't know. I just encourage people to seek stuff out for themselves, really. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to a perhaps lighter topic, and that's comedy.
Mm.
Kind of quite a harsh right turn or left turn here from one topic to the next. But comedy, it's something I like to talk about on my podcast quite a lot, because I'm a huge fan of comedy, and I think you are too.
Mm.
So the question I have for you here is simply, well, it's another what's your favourite? But at the moment, what comes to mind as one of your favourite comedy shows?
Well, you know what's coming here. You just teed this up, haven't you? Let's be honest.
Do I? Do I? Because either you're going to talk about Alan Partridge, or you're going to talk about Yes Minister.
Oh yes.
So it could be one of the two, but I think probably you're thinking of Alan Partridge right now.
Well, my favourite comedy shows. Britain has come up with some great sitcoms, but probably the top tier, not a huge surprise, I suppose, would be Alan. Probably on balance, I'd say series 1 of I'm Alan Partridge is probably still the best thing he's ever done. I like the old ones like Fawlty Towers. Not so mad on that. If I watch it again, it's still good, but it's a phrase that people don't like much, but it hasn't aged. But I don't mean in a woke sense. I'm just talking about the jokes. Because humor's got a bit more edge nowadays. I meant it in that sense. Yeah, I think there was a sweet spot in the 90s. I mean, I loved things like Absolutely Fabulous. And it wasn't that there were any great lines or I suppose there were great lines or great stories. It was just something about the atmosphere of it. I liked One Foot in the Grave because the thing about that was it wasn't about an old guy complaining. It was about how mad normal life is, suburban life, and how many strange things are going on all around you. But yeah, the top tier probably Blackadder, Only Fools and Horses, Yes Minister, and Alan, and obviously The Office as well.
Yeah, Blackadder, the one with Rowan Atkinson, who plays a character there's different series. Each series is in a different historical period, and essentially Blackadder is a normal person, sort of stuck in a historical period, and he's very cynical and self-interested. He wants to basically kind of get as much power and money as he can, but he's stuck in this sort of stuck within the historical context. Brilliant. And all the other characters around him are idiots, just idiots from history. Only Fools and Horses, two working class brothers in the East End of London. And it's a lot of it's about class, like working class life, and whether you can ever like become middle class if you're working class and things like that. What were the other ones?
Yes Minister, Alan Partridge, and The Office. I suppose that would be my top one. Right. Okay. I feel slightly reluctant to start talking about Alan Partridge now, because it's like a thing that we can never resolve, because he's such a fascinating, multi-dimensional character. What's your favourite Alan Partridge moment, or what's a moment, something that happens to Alan that you like? Oh God,
that you remember?
Oh man, so many.
So listeners, just in case you don't know who we're talking about, I have done episodes about Alan Partridge before. Some of you will remember I did 6 episodes about Alan Partridge. He's a comedy character. He's played by Steve Coogan, a brilliant actor, comedian. And Alan used to be this fictional character. Basically, he used to be a sports presenter on a fictional news program called The Day to Day. And then he was such a great character that they decided to make more shows with him. And Steve Coogan plays him so convincingly that they decided there was a lot more they could do with the character. So they decided they would make a show about his everyday life. And so we sort of follow Alan Partridge through his everyday life. This became the show called I'm Alan Partridge, and we see him. His wife has left him. She's thrown him out of the house. He's living in a sort of roadside travel tavern or a motel by the side of the road, and he's struggling to get a second series of his television show after his first one ended in catastrophe. when he shot a man dead live on television. Accidentally killed someone on TV. That's not funny, but somehow when Alan does it, it is. It's part of the mystery of Alan Partridge that he can do these terrible, terrible things, and it's just brilliant comedy. And so he's kind of lost in his life, and he's struggling to become relevant again. He desperately wants to have a second series on the BBC, but no one's interested. And he's living in a roadside hotel, and this is basically like a TV presenter who thinks, what is it? He's a sort of a D grade broadcaster who thinks he's an A grade broadcaster.
Yeah. Basically, yeah.
He doesn't know. He doesn't realise who he is. He thinks he's a lot bigger and better than he actually is, and he's kind of willing to do anything to be that A grade broadcaster. And he's selfish and horrible, but also somehow strangely sympathetic as a character. Like we relate to him, and we're compelled by him, and I like Alan actually more and more.
Yeah, he's
loosened. I don't know if that means I'm getting older.
No, he's loosened up. That's the thing. Around 2010, where they rebooted it, where it seemed like it might be the end of it, they got these two Gibbons guys called Gibbons brothers.
They didn't get two Gibbons.
But
they're called Gibbons, the Gibbons brothers. Yeah. They write the show now. Yeah.
But I was thinking about this. Why is it so good? And obviously, it's the lines and the acting and everything. But I think the thing is, if he was just stupid, maybe it wouldn't be that funny. But he has actually. I listened to Coogan and Armando Iannucci doing the commentary over I'm Alan Partridge Series 1, and at some point they said, the thing about it is that Alan has got talent. You know, he can go in front of a radio mic and talk, even if it's total bollocks. Yeah. He has got the ability to talk, and also he's quite quick-witted as well. So when someone tries to stitch him up or ridicule him, occasionally he can turn the tables. And I think if he wasn't talented a little bit, then it wouldn't work as well. But it's the same with, if you think of The Office. David Brent's an idiot, but he has got quite a lot of good lines and funny comedic references that obviously Ricky Gervais introduced in there. So I think that's the edge,
Yeah, both David Brent from The Office and Alan Partridge, they're people who, if you spent, let's say, 15 to 20 minutes in their company, you might think they were brilliant and great. You might think David Brent was a really inspirational manager who had created a really good atmosphere in the office, and he was like, you know, a really nice, reasonable person who cares about the good vibes in the office and stuff. And then, but you know, if you spend more time, you realise that he's like, what's the word for it? He just wants people's attention. He just wants people to like him. He's actually a really bad manager. He doesn't help the business operate well. He just is an attention seeker, and he doesn't care about anyone else except for himself. And it's a similar thing with Partridge. You could spend 20 minutes in his company. I'd like to have one pint with Alan Partridge, but after that, it would be too much. You know, if you got into a friendship with him, at some point he would betray you. He'd stab you in the back. He'd do something to destroy. You know, he would betray the friendship in some way, and you'd regret being his friend eventually.
Right.
You know, I could maybe go for a walk with him. You know, but then I'd be like, all right, that's enough, Alan, for a while. You know.
Yeah, it's a bit too much after a while. Yeah, there was one moment actually that I wanted to mention because it's partly linked with something that we've talked about with meditation and everything. But it's more of a relaxation tape. It's from Alan Partridge Series 1. He decides he wants to relax, and he's made his own relaxation tape, and he's going to listen back to it. You know, and it's all stuff like, imagine you're on a beach. And the bit I remember is going, imagine the waves licking at your feet. And you get so much character insight into, number one, that Alan can't relax because he keeps getting up and straightening his shoes and things like that. And
he can't relax because things aren't quite right in the room. He's lying down. He's stressed out. He's having a bad moment in his day, and he's decided he's going to try and relax. And so he plays his own meditation tape. But even that doesn't work because, as you say, like, he's not satisfied because he's, you know, the fact his shoes aren't sitting straight on the floor. he has to get up quickly and straighten the shoes, and then he has to get up and straighten the curtain and these things. Yeah.
But the moment is when he just finally goes, "Oh, shut up," and just turns the tape off. But it's Alan getting an insight into what Alan's actually like. He's Alan being annoyed by himself. I thought that was a really good choice.
Welcome to tape 2 of Let Go with Alan Partridge, a sequence of easy exercises to relieve stress enhanced by the tropical music of the panpipes. First, find a quiet place to recline, a bed or a big chair. I want you to imagine you're lying on the beach, divested of all the trappings of the 20th century. No mobile phone, batteries out of your pager, no clothes, completely naked, or with undergarments perhaps made from bark. You're all alone, the waves gently licking at your feet. Your bark trunk soaking up the water like a sponge. Your head loosens from the torso and bobs into the distance. Remember the breathing techniques from tape 1. Please relax. I can't emphasize that enough. All of us experience stress, whether you're a heart surgeon making vital incisions, or just Dave Bloggs queuing for a rail ticket behind a man who's buying a travel pass, which involves photographs, scissors, forms being filled in, and his access won't wipe. You get the picture. But stress like this just won't go away, and it has to be combated. Sod off.
Yeah. Fascinating character.
Really fascinating, yeah. We'll do something about it. Definitely.
Yeah, we should do.
And then Yes Minister, really just circling back to what we were saying earlier, really, it just shows you how everyone does conspire in Westminster.
Yeah, the show is called Yes Minister, and it's about... It's from the 1980s or 70s.
Yeah, late 70s to mid 80s. Yeah, because there was Prime Minister as well. Obviously, he became Prime Minister. Right.
It's a comedy show about a member of Parliament, a minister in the government, and you get to see life in Westminster. And the main characters are the MP and his permanent secretary.
Civil servant, yeah. Top
civil servant. Who's a civil servant. And it's, we see who is actually in control of who. The civil servant seems to be the one who's actually in control. But as you say, it actually shows us what really goes on in government.
It seems to have sort of went over everybody's head. They just said, oh, that's a fun comedy, And even the writers are saying, we had advisors who were real politicians. Yeah, it's a lot to go into, but I did a show about that. It's one of my back episodes, so I was quite pleased with.
Listeners, you should listen to those Yes Minister episodes because, it's just very interesting. First of all, it tells you lots of things about the show, and it's a great show. You can find lots of those videos, episodes online. And so it's a good introduction to the show if you're looking for an interesting bit of British comedy to watch that's really well written. Then that's a good one. But also, there's wider things that it shows us about the way that government works. And this comedy, it's interesting that the comedy can kind of reveal the truth, but it somehow, because it's comedy, I mean, unsurprisingly, people don't take it seriously, But a comedy show a satire like that can just really lay things bare and show us really what's going on. But it didn't seem to, make that many changes because it's comedy.
Yeah, and of course, because the people that were responsible for it, they are really part of the establishment. And I don't think there's a funny thing that happens. If you take a show like Have I Got News for You or a newspaper called Private Eye, both of which involve Ian Hislop, he obviously knows what's going on, or a lot of what's going on, and that it's not what we're being told. But then he will put people with tinfoil hats in Private Eye. They can't make that divide because maybe they don't really want anything to change. So you have to wonder about their motives for making the show. But I suppose they're just looking to make a successful comedy show on one level. But I think you can learn a lot from that show, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Finally, Antony, this really big, heavy question at the end for this light-hearted conversation that we're having. the final topic that you talk about sometimes is happiness, or in fact, you did a couple of episodes, I think, called "The Art of Happiness."
Yeah,
is that right?
3-part, in fact. Yes. Yeah.
3-part episode called "The Art of Happiness." Right, what's the art of happiness then, Antony? I can tell because you're obviously so happy. You've worked it out.
Yeah, this is the worst time because I'm really flagging now. But
okay, well, we'll keep it brief. Yeah, you're tired. I'm sorry to have kept you for so long.
That's all right. Well, there is a school of thought that says the key to happiness is low expectations, which sounds a bit cynical, but I think, well, obviously there's practical things, having good relationships with your family and having a core of good friends who you can tell the truth to. I think that is one of the keys. Having people around who you can be yourself with and who will tell you the truth and who you can tell the truth to. Because there's so much, BS in this world where we're just surrounded by it everywhere that I think it's much more stressful to not live authentically. So, I mean, all these things have become cliches now, but I think they're all perfectly true. Just trying to be yourself, try and find a job which is some reflection of you as a person, so you don't have to act all day. I think maybe that's the key, just trying to be as authentic as you can for as many hours of the day. I think another thing, going back to meditation again, is just being in the moment. Because I don't know about you, but I torture myself with lists. Obviously we've got a few tasks to do each week, but then I always seem to fill any potential free time with tasks that I have to do. And I think that creates a lot of stress. So I think trying to live as freely as possible, get what you need to do done, but try and I don't know, live authentically. Obviously, try and eat decent food and drink lots of fresh water if you can. Sort your physical out. With that, I'm going to turn it over to you because I'm lagging now.
I would just add as well, having read some of the Derren Brown book, which is called Happy, where he explores this very question. Also, it's about accepting that you're not going to be happy a lot of the time, or that you're not going to be happy all the time. That's the thing. A lot of people, there is this sort of approach to this, which is like positive. First of all, positive thinking. That you just like imagine the thing you want, picture yourself in the on some big expensive boat with a rich lifestyle, and it will materialize. Well, there's no evidence to suggest that your brain will somehow magically create the events, and that in fact is dangerous, because if you project this version of what you want and then you find it doesn't happen, you're going to be really disappointed. Instead, it's probably better to have the stoic approach, which is to understand that to an extent there will be times when you're unhappy and times when you suffer, and there's no way of escaping that. And if you get that into perspective, then perhaps you'll be less easily shocked or surprised when things don't work out in the idealistic way that you've been sort of dreaming of. That it's more realistic to instead accept certain things. Once you accept certain things, like certain that things are not going to go right. Things are not always going to go the way that we've been led to believe in all the films that we've watched. There won't necessarily be a happy ending, and so you've got to try and appreciate the things that you have, and live in the moment and enjoy, take time to kind of like stop and enjoy the things that you have, in front of you. I think it's probably all we can say. Because you're exhausted because of COVID, and we've been talking for an hour and 40 minutes, and I really need the toilet. I don't know about you.
I haven't been drinking any water.
No.
But be authentic, be realistic as well. I did a show about how being cynical or skeptical isn't always bad, because you do need to be realistic about your life as well. Which doesn't mean, just being negative. It's not quite the same thing. But and try and experience every moment of the day if you can, which sounds sounds strange to say that, but I think a lot of us sleepwalk through the day. Try and just be alive to every moment, even if it's not a good moment. Be alive to it, make the most of it, because a day can be very long, or a day can just whiz by if you're not paying attention to anything. So, be mindful.
Some things are just, some things are, like going back to David Blaine sitting in a plastic box, hanging above the streets of London at Tower Bridge. Yeah, he enjoyed the sun coming up and seeing the smile on a kid's face.
Probably watched the sun properly as well, instead of just going, "Oh yeah, it's the sun, it's coming up." He probably watched it intensely, and we've all done that when we've been on holiday and stuff. And we could be lying on the beach or we could be in the mountains, and we suddenly start to observe nature and how miraculous it is, and actually look at it properly. I have this great memory of I think I was in Laos actually. And I was sitting in a deck chair, and like I said, I do have problems relaxing. I never properly relax. And I just remember sitting in this deck chair for hours and hours and just gazing out at the sea and gazing out at the sun, like I said, the sun coming down. And it was just beautiful, and it's there, and it's all these things are more or less free as well, Okay, you have to go on holiday, but you know what I mean? You can go to your local park or whatever. I like just watching people or, enjoying themselves.
It's very interesting how social conventions sometimes can make it hard for us to do those things because we feel like we're going to be weird or something. I mean, like I was on holiday last week, as I said before, at the seaside, and I saw quite a lot of people fishing. And there was one guy, so we were having lunch in this sort of restaurant in front of the sea. And there was a guy who'd set up his fishing rod and a chair. He set the fishing rod up, and he sat in the chair, and he just sat there for ages. He sat there all throughout our lunch. We went for a walk, we came back, he was still sitting there. Right? Now, obviously, he's fishing, but he didn't catch anything, right? There was no moment throughout any of it where it was like, whoa, a fish! We had to try and pull the fish in. So essentially, he's just sitting on the beach and just looking at the water, looking at the ripples of the water. And I understand it's wonderful. I've never done that. I've never done fishing, but apparently it's absolutely fantastic. You really absorb you just take the time to really appreciate the surroundings, like the movement of the water. You sort of notice things that you don't normally notice. And I just thought, well, like he could have just put a chair down and just sat there. But no, instead it's like the act of fishing which allows him to sit and just appreciate this place. But if he was just a guy, like some people do it, they stand in the river, they stand sort of with their sort of thigh deep in the water and stand there for ages. But if you're just a guy standing in a river without a fishing rod, just standing there appreciating nature, then people are going to think you're a crazy person, right? Like there he is standing in the river again. But if you're holding a fishing rod, that makes it okay, doesn't it?
It's funny, isn't it? Yeah. But I think, society has gone that way, that everything is working against that idea of just relaxing and, just enjoying things like that. Yeah, it all just seems so strange, because we're just conditioned to think the busy state is the normal one. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Well, Antony, thanks a lot.
Welcome.
Obviously, we've just been through some really sort of diverse things, quite heavy things, in quite a quick way, really. I know this has been over an hour and a half, but I think these are probably subjects that deserve to be dealt with in a more considered way. And you have done that in your show. So, listeners, you can check out Antony's podcast, Life and Life Only, if you want to hear his perhaps more measured or
less ill insights.
Times when he was able to talk about these things in a planned way when he was in slightly better physical condition. But thanks, Antony. Thanks for giving us your time.
You're very welcome. My other podcast, if you don't mind, Glass Onion on John Lennon. It's obviously about John Lennon. More than 4 years now. And then
it's really good, listeners. It's really good. I love the way that you go into such detail about these aspects of John Lennon's life. I mean, as a Beatles fan, I just love that. I love listening to Beatles podcasts. I was listening to something about the Beatles just before doing this. I just love listening to other people who are able to talk about this subject in a way that I can't.
Right.
You know, like I'm not able to be so coherent and clear about it. So it's a real pleasure for me to listen to you talking about John Lennon and exploring these aspects of his life in a very coherent, sort of lucid way.
Yeah.
It's a really good podcast.
Thank you very much. Yeah. And then it's Film Gold, gets a bit neglected, but we just put out Sorcerer, as I said, that went out on video in April. Yeah, well, last week, early May. When's this coming out, by the way? Do we know? When are people watching this?
Antony, I'm afraid this is going to come out potentially in August.
Oh, God.
I know, because I've been talking about this on the podcast. I'm trapped in a time loop where I've done so many episodes because my wife's having a baby in a few weeks now. So I decided I would produce as many episodes as I could, so that then I could just like take 2 months off, maybe, or even a month off or something, and so I'd have enough episodes already recorded that I could publish. So yeah, this one is like all the way at the end of the queue, so it's probably going to come out in August.
Oh, blimey.
Now. So
my COVID will just be a memory.
Yes, yes, exactly. So hopefully all of the things we've said are still going to be relevant, and that AI hasn't become sentient and taken over the world by that point. So hopefully people are still able to listen to this and it all makes sense. Yeah, but thanks a lot.
All right, you're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
Cheers.